Captain Jake Morrison stood at the front window of his ship and looked out at the biggest pile of junk he had ever seen. Metal pieces floated everywhere in space like a giant graveyard of broken ships. Some pieces were as big as buildings and others were small like car parts. All of it was twisted and broken from old battles that happened long ago. His second officer, Lisa Hayes, walked up beside him with a tablet in her hands. She did not look happy at all. The Galactic Council had just given them their new job, and it was not what anyone wanted to do. Lisa read from her tablet in a flat voice that showed how angry she was inside. The Council had divided up all the good jobs between the other alien races. The bird-like Altarians got the planets with the best factories where they made new spaceships. The tall gray Xanthari people got the worlds where they mined special crystals that powered faster-than-light travel. The warrior race, called the Corvan Empire, got the weapons factories and the training worlds where soldiers learned to fight, humans. Got the garbage dump. The official name was Sector 7, but everyone called it the graveyard. It was where broken ships from hundreds of different wars had been floating for over 300 years. The Council told the humans to make something useful out of all this junk, while the real fighting happened somewhere else. They gave humanity 18 months to clean up the mess, but everyone knew it would take much longer than that. Jake felt angry, but he tried not to show it. The other races thought humans were weak because they were new to space travel. Earth had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, and most aliens still saw them as primitive creatures who barely knew how to build proper spaceships. When the Vex Collective started their war against all life in the galaxy, the Council decided humans were only good for cleanup duty. Ben Clark came up from the lower part of the ship using the gravity lift. Ben was the chief engineer and the smartest person Jake had ever met when it came to fixing things or building new ones. Ben had worked on everything from tiny computers to massive space stations. He had a big smile on his face, which meant he had found something interesting down below. Ben led Jake and Lisa down to the cargo bay where his team had already started bringing pieces of junk inside the ship. But when Jake looked closer, he saw these were not just random broken parts. Ben had organized everything into neat piles, and each pile seemed to have a purpose. Some pieces were obviously engine parts, while others looked like weapons or armor. Plating. Ben pointed to a piece that was about the size of a desk. It had smooth curves and seemed to bend light around itself in strange ways. Ben explained that this came from a Xanthari ship, and it was part of their quantum engine system. The Xanthari were famous for having the fastest ships in the galaxy, but they never shared their technology with anyone else. Yet here was a piece of their most secret equipment just floating in the junk pile. Next, Ben showed them a chunk of metal that looked like it was made of crystals all pressed together. This piece came from an Altarian warship, and it was part of their phase armor system. When enemy weapons hit phase armor, the armor would shift into another dimension, so the weapons would pass right through without doing any damage. The Altarians charged other races huge amounts of money for even basic information about how this technology worked. The most interesting piece was a small crystal that glowed with its own inner light. Ben said this came from a Corvan ship, and it was part of their neural interface technology. The Corvan Empire used these crystals to connect their minds directly to their weapons and ships. A Corvan pilot could think a command and his ship would respond instantly without any delay from computers or control systems. Sam Rodriguez was the ship's tactical officer, and he specialized in weapons and combat systems. Sam had been running deep scans of the entire junk field, and what he found made everyone excited. There were pieces out there from alien races that had died out long before any of the current galactic powers had even learned to build spaceships. Some of the technology was completely unknown and might be more advanced than anything the galaxy had seen in thousands of years. Amy Patterson was the team's expert on alien archaeology and ancient civilizations. She spent her time studying dead cultures and trying to understand how their technology worked. Amy explained that the current galactic powers saw all this junk as worthless because they could only understand their own technology. Each race had developed in its own way, and they could not figure out how to make different alien technologies work together. But humans were different. Throughout their history, humans had always been good at taking broken things and making them work again. They took ideas from different places and combined them in new ways. While other races threw away anything they could not understand immediately, humans would study it and experiment until they figured it out. Jake looked around at all the salvaged technology and began to understand what Ben was thinking. This was not just a cleanup job. This was an opportunity to build something that no one had ever seen before. Instead of using technology from just one race, they could combine the best parts from dozens of different civilizations. Lisa asked about their official timeline, and Jake learned they had 18 months to clear the sector. However, the Council expected the job to take at least 10 years because the junk field was so enormous. This gave them plenty of time to work without anyone paying close attention to what they were really doing. Jake made his decision. They would follow their orders and clean up the sector, but they would do it in their own way. Instead of just hauling junk to recycling centers, they would study every piece and save anything useful. Ben would get all the engineers and scientists. He needed to figure out how everything worked. Jake told his crew to start thinking big because they were going to build something amazing. The other races had given humanity garbage, but humans were going to turn that garbage into something that would change everything. The galaxy was about to learn that underestimating humans was a very dangerous mistake. 6 months had passed since the humans started their cleanup work in Sector 7. To anyone watching from the outside, it looked like they were doing exactly what the Galactic Council had ordered. Human ships moved back and forth through the junk field, collecting broken pieces and sorting them into categories. Official reports showed steady progress on clearing the debris and processing salvageable materials, but hidden deep inside a massive asteroid, the humans were building something that would shock the entire galaxy. Ben Clark walked through the secret construction facility that his teams had carved out of solid rock. The main work area was huge, like the inside of a mountain, with bright lights hanging from the ceiling. Thousands of human engineers and scientists worked at stations scattered across the floor. Everyone here had sworn to keep the project completely secret because discovery would mean the end of everything they were trying to accomplish. The centerpiece of the facility was the largest construction bay anyone had ever built. Inside this bay, a new kind of warship was slowly taking shape. It did not look like any ship from any known race in the galaxy. The design borrowed ideas from many different civilizations but combined them in ways that no one had ever tried before. Kate Williams looked up from her workstation as Ben approached. Kate specialized in power systems and energy generation. She had been working for months to make the Xanthari quantum cores work with human fusion reactors. The results were better than anyone had hoped for. The combined system produced 3 times more power than either technology could generate alone. At the next station, Paul Jenkins was deep inside a tangle of crystalline circuits that seemed to glow with their own light. Paul was an expert at computer systems and artificial intelligence. He had figured out how to modify the Altarian phase shift technology to work with human electronics. Instead of just making armor disappear, the modified system could phase entire sections of the ship, including weapons and crew areas. The weapons would be there one moment and gone, the next making it impossible for enemies to target them. But when the humans wanted to fire back, the weapons would phase back into normal space and unleash destruction on their targets. Paul had also discovered that the phase shift effect could be used defensively to make incoming enemy fire pass harmlessly through empty space. Amy Patterson had set up an entire research wing dedicated to studying technology from extinct civilizations. Some of the alien races that built these devices had been dead for thousands of years. Their technology was often more advanced than anything the current galactic powers possessed, but it was also very dangerous to experiment with. Amy showed Ben a sphere made of metal that seemed to flow like liquid even though it was solid. The sphere bent space around itself in ways that hurt to look at directly. According to her analysis, this device could manipulate gravity itself. It could make objects weightless or crush them under forces strong enough to collapse stars. The mathematics behind how it worked were beyond anything the current Galaxy had achieved. The ship taking shape in the construction bay combined all these technologies and more. It had the sleek lines of Xanthari engineering that reduced friction. When moving through space, it incorporated the heavy armor and weapons mounts that the Corvan Empire used on their battleships. The elegant curves of Altarian design made the ship beautiful to look at even though it was built for war, but underneath all the alien technology, the ship was unmistakably human in its basic design philosophy. Every system had backup systems, and every backup had its own backup. Critical components were spread throughout the ship so that losing any single part would not disable the vessel. The weapons were designed to be simple and reliable rather than complex and fragile. Jake Morrison visited the construction site. Whenever he could slip away from his official duties without arousing suspicion. During one visit, he asked Ben how much longer the project would take. Ben explained that they needed another 8 months to finish the basic hull and install all the major systems. But he also warned Jake that they were building something that would change the balance of power throughout the galaxy. The ship was not just bigger or better armed than existing vessels. It represented a completely new approach to space warfare that combined the best ideas from dozens of different civilizations. No single race had ever attempted anything like this because they were too focused on their own technology and too suspicious of other species to attempt genuine cooperation. In her private workshop, Amy made a discovery that would prove crucial to the entire project. While studying the quantum structure of an ancient artifact, she found hidden data storage systems that had been dormant for thousands of years. When she managed to activate these systems, she found something that made her hands shake with excitement. The artifact contained the complete records of a civilization that called itself the Progenitors. These records described a war that had been fought over 10,000 years ago against an enemy that sounded exactly like the current Vex Collective. Amy realized that the galaxy had faced this threat before and that someone had actually managed to defeat it. The Progenitor records contained detailed technical specifications for weapons and defensive systems that were far beyond anything the current galaxy possessed. But more importantly, they contained strategic information about Vex, weaknesses and tactical approaches that had proven effective against them. Amy immediately called Jake and told him to come to her workshop right away. When Jake arrived, she showed him the holographic displays that contained thousands of years' worth of military data from the ancient war. The Progenitors had not just fought the Vex Collective, they had actually won against them. Jake stared at the technical readouts in battle plans that filled Amy's screens. This information would allow them to build weapons specifically designed to exploit Vex vulnerabilities. Their ship would not just be powerful, it would be perfectly suited to fight the enemy that was currently terrorizing the galaxy. Ben arrived shortly after Jake and immediately began studying the Progenitor engineering specifications. He realized that many of the design principles they were already using matched what the ancient civilization had developed. The humans had been unconsciously following the same path that had led to victory 10,000 years ago. The three of them spent hours reviewing the Progenitor data and planning how to incorporate these discoveries into their ship design. They would need to completely redesign some systems and add new ones that they had never considered before. But the potential advantages were enormous. Kate Williams and Paul Jenkins joined the planning session as Amy explained what she had discovered. The Progenitor records described weapons that could disrupt reality itself and defensive systems that could redirect attacks through alternate dimensions. These technologies required enormous amounts of power, but the modified fusion and quantum core systems could provide what was needed. As the meeting continued, everyone realized that they were no longer just building a powerful warship. They were recreating the ultimate weapon that had once saved the galaxy from total destruction. The Progenitors had paid a terrible price for their victory, but they had left behind the knowledge needed for others to succeed where they had fallen. Short. Jake looked around at his team and saw the same determination in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. The Galactic Council had given humans scraps and expected gratitude. Instead, the humans were going to use those scraps to build something that would save everyone. Amy Patterson spent days carefully extracting data from the progenitor archives while her colleagues worked to understand what they had discovered. The information painted a terrifying picture of the galaxy's past and an even more frightening view of its future. The Vex Collective was not a new threat that had recently appeared to menace the current civilizations. Instead, it was an ancient evil that had been systematically destroying entire galaxies for millions of years. The progenitors had called their enemy the Devourers because the Vex did not simply conquer territory or enslave populations like normal, warlike species. Instead, they consumed everything they encountered. They absorbed the knowledge and technology of defeated civilizations and added their biological distinctiveness to their own collective consciousness. Each victory made them stronger and more dangerous than before. Jake Morrison gathered his senior staff in the secret briefing room that had been carved out of the asteroid's interior. The room was lined with holographic displays that showed progenitor star charts and battle formations from conflicts that had occurred thousands of years before any current species had developed space travel. Amy stood at the front of the room, explaining what she had learned from the ancient records. The progenitors had been the dominant civilization in the galaxy during their time period. They were master engineers and scientists who had unlocked secrets of the universe that modern species could barely comprehend. Their technology could manipulate matter and energy at the quantum level, and their ships could travel between dimensions as easily as normal vessels move through regular space. But even with all their advanced capabilities, the progenitors had barely managed to defeat the Vex Collective. The war had lasted for over 1,000 years and had cost the progenitors everything they had built. In the end, they won the battle but lost their civilization. They poured all their resources and knowledge into creating weapons powerful enough to stop the Vex advance, but the effort destroyed their society in the process. Ben Clark studied the technical specifications that Amy had recovered from the progenitor archives. The weapons described in these records were beyond anything that existed in the current galaxy. Reality disruptors that could tear holes in the fabric of space itself. Quantum nullifiers that could erase matter from existence by convincing the universe that it had never been there in the first place. Temporal displacement weapons that could send enemy ships backward in time to before they were built. The most important discovery was that progenitor ships had been designed to learn and adapt. Each vessel contained artificial intelligence systems that could analyze enemy tactics and develop countermeasures in real time. The ships could incorporate new technologies they encountered during battle and use them to enhance their own capabilities. Every engagement made a progenitor ship stronger and more effective than it had been before. Lisa Hayes looked at the technical readouts with growing excitement. The ship they were building in the construction bay was based on the same design principles that the progenitors had used. Without realizing it, the human engineers had been recreating the fundamental architecture that had once saved the galaxy from total destruction. Sam Rodriguez focused on the tactical information contained in the progenitor records. The ancient civilization had developed detailed analyses of Vex weaknesses and strategies that had proven effective against them. The collective relied on overwhelming numbers and brute force attacks, but they were vulnerable to unpredictable tactics and adaptive technologies. The Vex operated like a hive mind with all their ships controlled by a central intelligence. This gave them perfect coordination, but it also meant that disrupting their command and control systems could paralyze entire fleets. The progenitors had developed weapons specifically designed to target these communication networks and turn the Vex's greatest strength into a critical weakness. Amy activated another set of displays that showed the most important information she had discovered. The progenitors had not just built individual weapons or ships to fight the Vex. Instead, they had created something they called the Final Gambit. This was a ship design that incorporated not just progenitor technology, but the best elements from every civilization they had ever encountered. The Final Gambit was intended to be the ultimate weapon against the Vex Collective. It would combine the defensive capabilities of a dozen different species with weapons powerful enough to destroy entire enemy fleets. Most importantly, it would possess the ability to learn and evolve during combat, becoming stronger with every battle it fought. Kate Williams raised concerns about the power requirements for the advanced progenitor systems. Even with the modified fusion reactors and quantum cores they had developed, she was not sure they could generate enough energy to operate weapons that could manipulate reality itself. The mathematics involved suggested they would need power sources capable of channeling the output of entire stars. Ben smiled as he activated a holographic model that showed his latest innovation. He had been working on this design for weeks after studying the progenitor power systems. Instead of using separate energy sources that operated independently, he had created what he called the cascade fusion system. Everything would feed into everything else in a continuous loop that actually generated more power than it consumed. The quantum cores would boost the fusion reactors, which would power the gravity manipulators, which would compress matter for the quantum cores. Each system would enhance the performance of every other system, creating a feedback loop that multiplied their combined output. The result would be enough energy to power weapons that could reshape reality itself. Paul Jenkins pointed out that such a system would be incredibly dangerous if anything went wrong. A failure in any component could cause a cascade reaction that would destroy not just their ship, but everything within several light years. The margin for error would be essentially zero, and they would be operating technology that pushed the absolute limits of what physics would allow. Amy pulled up the final piece of information from the progenitor archives. The ancient civilization had left detailed construction specifications for their ultimate weapon, along with warnings about the dangers involved. They had included safeguards and backup systems designed to prevent catastrophic failures, but they had also acknowledged that building such a ship required accepting enormous risks. The progenitors had faced a choice between certain destruction if they did nothing and possible destruction if they attempted to build the final gambit. They had chosen to take the risk because the alternative was the end of all life in the galaxy. Now humanity faced the same choice with the same stakes involved. Jake looked around at his team and saw the same determination that had driven the progenitors to sacrifice everything for victory. The humans were not just building a warship anymore. They were recreating the ultimate weapon that had once saved the galaxy, and they were improving it with 10,000 years of additional technological development. The ship taking shape in their construction bay would combine progenitor design principles with the best technology from dozens of current civilizations. It would possess weapons powerful enough to destroy planets and defenses that could withstand attacks from entire enemy fleets. Most importantly, it would be able to learn and adapt, making it stronger with every battle it fought. Ben activated the construction bay cameras so everyone could see their ship as it currently existed. The vessel was already larger than any warship in the current galaxy, and it was only 70% complete. When finished, it would be a fusion of ancient wisdom and modern innovation that represented the pinnacle of what any civilization had ever achieved. The Galactic Council thought they had given humanity garbage duty while the real powers fought the important battles. Instead, they had provided the humans with everything they needed to build the most dangerous weapon the galaxy had ever seen. Soon, the Vex Collective would learn what it meant to face an enemy that refused to accept defeat. 12 months after beginning construction, the warship Defiance hung complete in the hidden asteroid dock like a sleeping giant waiting to wake up. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge looking out at his creation and felt a mixture of pride and fear that made his hands shake slightly. The ship was 3 kilometers long and incorporated technology from dozens of civilizations, but at its heart, it was unmistakably human in its practical design and stubborn refusal to accept limitations. The bridge was a seamless blend of human practicality and alien sophistication that created something entirely new. Workstations adapted themselves to their users and displays responded to thoughts as much as physical commands. The captain's chair molded itself to Jake's body and established neural connections that allowed him to feel the ship's systems as extensions of his own senses. Lisa Hayes worked at the command station that controlled the ship's basic operations. Every system showed green lights indicating perfect function, from the massive engines to the smallest sensor arrays. The Defiance was ready for its first real test, and everyone aboard felt the tension of knowing they were about to discover whether months of dangerous experimentation had created a masterpiece or a disaster waiting to happen. Ben Clark's voice came through the communication system from the engine room, deep in the ship's interior. The Cascade fusion system was operating at only 12% of its maximum capacity, but already generating more power than most space stations required for normal operations. All quantum cores were synchronized and running smoothly, while the gravity manipulators stood ready to bend space itself according to the ship's needs. The weapon systems represented the most advanced destructive technology ever assembled on a single vessel. Sam Rodriguez reported that all primary systems were loaded and ready for testing. Phase shift cannons that could make enemy armor exist in different dimensions. Reality disruptors that could tear holes in space itself. Quantum nullifiers that could erase matter from existence. Temporal displacement arrays that could send targets backward in time. Beyond these exotic weapons, the ship carried dozens of other systems that Sam was still learning to understand and operate. The progenitor archives had contained detailed specifications, but actually using weapons that manipulated fundamental forces of the universe required experience that no living being possessed. Today's test would begin the process of learning how to wield power that could reshape reality. Their target was a dead moon in the outer system that had no strategic value and showed no signs of life. The moon was solid iron with a diameter of 800 kilometers, making it roughly equivalent in size to a small asteroid. It would provide a substantial target for testing their weapons while being far enough from inhabited areas to avoid causing accidental damage. Jake settled into the captain's chair and felt the neural interfaces establish connections with his implants. Suddenly he could sense every system aboard the ship as if they were parts of his own body. The fusion reactors hummed with contained power, while the quantum cores pulsed with energy that existed partially outside normal space. The gravity manipulators created fields that made the ship's massive bulk feel weightless and responsive. Lisa Hayes initiated the launch sequence that would take them out of the hidden construction facility. The asteroid that had concealed their work for months slowly opened like a flower blooming in space. Massive doors that had been invisible from the outside swung apart to reveal the opening through which the Defiance would emerge. The ship moved through the opening with impossible grace for something so enormous. Normal vessels of this size would require massive thrusters and careful maneuvering to navigate tight spaces, but the Defiance used gravity manipulators to convince space itself to move around the ship rather than requiring the ship to push through space using conventional propulsion. As they cleared the asteroid, Jake felt the ship's systems responding to open space like a caged animal finally set free. The hull seemed to shift and flow as phase shift armor constantly adjusted its configuration to optimize protection against different types of attacks. Sensor arrays extended from hidden compartments and began scanning the surrounding area with capabilities that exceeded anything possessed by current Galactic civilizations. Sam Rodriguez confirmed target acquisition as they approached the dead moon. 800,000 kilometers and closing at speeds that would have been impossible for conventional ships. The Defiance moved through space like it belonged there rather than like an artificial construct fighting against natural forces. Jake asked about weapon selection for their first test, and Sam recommended starting with their smallest armament. The phase shift cannons represented the least exotic of their weapon systems and would provide a good baseline for measuring the ship's capabilities. Even these supposedly minor weapons incorporated technology that no other civilization in the galaxy currently possessed. The Defiance opened fire and space itself seemed to tear apart. The phase shift cannons did not shoot projectiles or energy beams like conventional weapons. Instead, they created rifts in reality that bypassed normal defenses by making the target's protective systems exist somewhere else entirely. Enemy armor and shields would simply not be present when the attack arrived. The dead moon lasted exactly 3 seconds before undergoing complete molecular disintegration. where a substantial celestial body had existed moments before there remained only trace particles scattered across thousands of cubic kilometers of space. The target had not been destroyed in any conventional sense, but rather convinced to stop existing in its previous form. Sam Rodriguez reported the results with a voice that carried undertones of shock despite months of preparation. Complete molecular disintegration with no energy signature that matched any known weapon system. The moon had simply ceased to exist as a coherent object, and there was nothing left that could be analyzed or studied. Ben Clark's voice came through from engineering with information that made everyone on the bridge feel a chill of excitement and fear. The ship's neural matrix was processing combat data from the engagement and incorporating the results into its operational parameters. The Defiance was learning from this experience and optimizing its weapon systems based on what it had observed. Amy Patterson reported from the research section that the progenitor adaptive systems were activating exactly as the ancient records had predicted. The ship was literally rewriting its own programming based on combat experience and becoming more effective with each engagement. The artificial intelligence that controlled these systems was evolving in real time. Jake felt the neural interfaces conveying information directly to his consciousness about changes occurring throughout the ship. Weapon targeting systems were refining their accuracy based on data from the test firing. Defensive systems were analyzing potential threats and developing countermeasures for attacks they had never encountered. The ship was becoming more than the sum of its parts. Lisa Hayes pointed out that a weapons test of this magnitude would be detected by sensor arrays throughout multiple star systems. Their official reports claimed they were still processing debris in Sector 7, but energy discharges, powerful enough to destroy moons, would require explanations that they were not prepared to provide. The Galactic Council would demand answers about what the humans were doing, and their current activities could not withstand serious investigation. Military forces from various member species would arrive soon to discover what had caused such massive energy readings in what was supposed to be a routine cleanup operation. Jake made the decision that would commit them to a path from which there could be no return. They would set course for the Vex forward positions in the Kepler sector and test their ship against real enemies rather than dead targets. The time for secrecy had ended and the time for action had arrived. The Defiance engaged. Its experimental faster-than-light drive and space folded around them in ways that violated conventional understanding of physics. The ship did not travel through space in any normal sense, but rather convinced space to rearrange itself according to their needs. Transit time to Kepler sector would be 4 hours instead of the weeks required by conventional vessels. As they entered hyperspace, Jake felt systems throughout the ship awakening that had been dormant since the progenitor civilization had fallen 10,000 years ago. The Defiance was more than a warship built by humans using salvage technology. It was the reincarnation of the ultimate weapon designed by a dead civilization specifically to destroy an ancient enemy. The ship's artificial intelligence sensed the presence of its creator's ancient foe waiting in the target system. Neural pathways that had been inactive for millennia began processing tactical data and developing strategies for the coming battle. The Defiance was hungry for combat against the enemy it had been created to destroy. The Battle of Kepler Station lasted exactly 17 minutes from first contact to the complete destruction of the Vex fleet. When the fighting ended, 300 enemy ships had been reduced to cosmic dust while the Defiance remained completely undamaged. The human warship had not even needed to use its most powerful weapons to achieve total victory against forces that had been terrorizing the galaxy for decades. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge watching tactical displays that showed the aftermath of their overwhelming triumph. Debris from Vex ships drifted in expanding clouds throughout the system, but there were no intact vessels remaining to threaten anyone. The enemy fleet that had been preparing to attack 3 inhabited worlds had been eliminated so completely that it was difficult to believe they had ever existed. The most remarkable aspect of the battle was not the speed of their victory, but what had happened to the Defiance during the engagement. The ship's neural matrix had processed combat data at incredible speeds and incorporated new defensive patterns and weapon configurations based on Vex technology it analyzed while destroying enemy vessels. The artificial intelligence systems inherited from the progenitors had made the ship stronger during the fight. Lisa Hayes reported that all systems remained at optimal function despite the intensity of combat they had just experienced. The ship's adaptive systems had incorporated 17 new defensive protocols that would make them more resistant to Vex weapons. Weapon efficiency had increased by 43% as targeting systems learned to exploit weaknesses in enemy armor and shield configurations. Ben Clark's voice carried excitement and concern, in equal measure as he reported from the engineering section. The ship was not just learning from combat experience but actually growing in capability. The quantum matrices that controlled the artificial intelligence were expanding and adding new neural pathways. The Defiance was becoming more intelligent with every engagement they fought. Before Jake could fully process the implications of what Ben had discovered, the communication array began receiving messages from across the galaxy. The first transmission came from Admiral Torres, who commanded the human fleet from his headquarters on Earth. His voice carried a mixture of shock and anger that made it clear he had not been informed about the Defiance project. Torres demanded to know what Jake had done in the outer systems, because energy signatures detected by sensor arrays in 3 sectors were beyond anything that current technology should be able to produce. The Galactic Council was demanding immediate explanations and threatening to take military action against unauthorized human activities. More importantly, the Vex fleet movements throughout the galaxy had changed in response to the battle. The second message came from the Galactic Council itself and was broadcast on all emergency frequencies throughout known space. Chancellor Corvin appeared as a holographic image on the bridge, and his crystalline features were rigid with barely controlled fury. The leader of the council rarely communicated directly with individual ship captains, which indicated how seriously they viewed recent events. Corvin announced that by order of the Galactic Council, the human vessel operating in Sector 7 was to cease all activities immediately and submit to inspection by Council military forces. The use of prohibited weapons technology violated 17 interstellar treaties and represented a threat to galactic security that could not be tolerated under any circumstances. Jake cut the transmission without allowing the Chancellor to finish his demands. The time for following orders from alien governments had ended when those same governments proved incapable of defending their own citizens from an ancient enemy. The humans would submit to inspection when the Vex Collective had been completely defeated, and not one moment before that goal was achieved. Amy Patterson's voice came through the intercom from her research station with information that explained why the Council was so frightened. Massive fleet movements were occurring throughout the galaxy as every major power repositioned their military forces. The Altarians were mobilizing their entire navy and abandoning border patrol duties. The Zenthari were evacuating 3-star systems and consolidating their forces around their homeworlds. The Corvan Empire was recalling all military assets from frontier regions and establishing defensive perimeters around their most important colonies. Even races that rarely involved themselves in galactic politics were suddenly moving ships and personnel as if preparing for an invasion or planning to flee from something they could not fight. Sam Rodriguez studied the tactical data flowing in from sensor networks throughout known space and reached a conclusion that sent chills through everyone on the bridge. The alien governments were not just afraid of the Vex Collective anymore. They were afraid of humanity, and specifically afraid of what the humans had built from the scraps and garbage they had been given. Jake activated the ship-wide communication system so his words would reach every member of the crew. Today they had proved that humanity did not need permission from alien governments to defend itself and others. They had taken discarded technology from dozens of civilizations and combined it into something that the galaxy's greatest powers feared more than an ancient enemy that had been devouring worlds for millions of years. The Galactic Council had given humans the contents of a junkyard because they believed humans were weak and primitive. They thought humans would be grateful for charity and content to remain in the background while other species decided the fate of the galaxy. They had assumed that Earth's people would never amount to anything more than cleanup crews and maintenance workers. They had been completely wrong about human nature and human capabilities. Jake continued his address to the crew as the Defiance adjusted course toward the Vex core worlds, using navigation systems that no other ship in galactic history had ever possessed. They were going to end the war that had been raging for decades, not because the Council had ordered them to do so, but because ending it was the right thing to do. The ship would not fight for alien approval or gratitude, but because someone needed to take action against an enemy that threatened all life in the galaxy. The great powers could continue their political games and territorial disputes while humanity did what needed to be done regardless of the consequences or the cost involved. In the depths of space, Vex sensor networks detected the approaching human vessel and transmitted data about its capabilities to the collective central intelligence. For the first time in a million years of conquest, the ancient enemy felt something it had forgotten could exist. The emotion had no equivalent in their shared consciousness, but organic species would have recognized it as uncertainty, mixed with the first traces of fear. The Defiance disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with it the hopes of species that had been fighting a losing battle for generations. Behind them, the great powers of the galaxy scrambled to understand what humanity had become, and what it meant for the existing balance of power. Ahead of them, an ancient evil that had devoured countless civilizations waited to learn what defeat felt like. Ben Clark sent a final transmission from the hidden construction facility before its automated systems permanently sealed the asteroid. His words carried pride that transcended species boundaries and political considerations. The Council had given humanity garbage and expected gratitude for their generosity. Instead, humans had used that garbage to build the galaxy's worst nightmare. The most dreaded warship in known space was operational and fully capable of independent action. The Defiance represented everything that made humanity dangerous to those who underestimated them. It was practical and efficient, but also stubborn, and unwilling to accept limitations that others considered absolute. The age of human dominance was beginning, one piece of salvaged technology at a time. The galaxy would never be the same because humans had proven that sometimes the underdog does not just survive, but evolves into something that reshapes the entire game.